My name is Maya and I'm 26 years old. This is the story of how my own family, the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, showed up in my city, just a few miles from my apartment, and didn't even bother to call. They said they didn't want to bother me. What they didn't know was that their silence was the loudest wake-up call I ever received, and it set in motion a series of events they would deeply regret. You won't believe what my family did, and how I finally found justice. I grew up in a family where roles were assigned early and rigidly. My older brother David was the creative one, the sensitive one, the one who needed constant encouragement and financial support. I was the responsible one, the practical one, the one who could handle things herself. From a young age, while David was encouraged to pursue his artistic hobbies, I was doing chores, washing dishes after family dinners, mowing the lawn, helping with grocery shopping. It wasn't just about tasks, it was about expectation. David's successes, like winning a small art competition in high school, were celebrated with fanfare and expensive gifts. My successes, like winning the regional math competition or getting a scholarship to college, were met with quiet nods and practical presents. A new set of towels, a sturdy backpack. Useful, yes, but they lacked the sparkle, the sense that I was the gift they were celebrating. This pattern continued into adulthood. I worked hard through college, juggling studies with part-time jobs to minimize student loans. David drifted between jobs, always needing a little help from mom and dad to cover rent or buy new equipment for his latest passion project that never quite took off. I never resented helping out with family expenses when I could. If my parents needed a little extra for a repair or a bill, I was always the first one they called, and I always sent what I could, even when my own budget was tight. David, meanwhile, rarely contributed, his needs always seeming more urgent, his struggles more deserving of sympathy and aid. My parents weren't overtly cruel. They weren't monsters. They genuinely seemed to believe they were doing what was best, nurturing David's fragile talent and supporting his journey. But their belief system was built on a foundation of deep-seated favoritism that blinded them to the unfairness. They saw my independence and self-reliance not as strengths they had fostered, but as proof that I didn't need their support, financial or emotional, in the same way David did. This created a dangerous dynamic. I was valued for what I could give, while David was valued for who he was or who they hoped he would become. The first real hint that this favoritism extended to more significant matters came a few years ago. My parents own a modest house. Nothing grand, but it's paid off and represents the bulk of their assets. During a casual conversation, my mom mentioned they were thinking about future planning. She spoke vaguely about making sure David was taken care of, because he wasn't as financially stable as I was. There was no mention of me, no consideration for my own future goals like buying a home or starting a family. It was all about ensuring David's comfort. I brushed it off then, telling myself she didn't mean anything by it, that of course they would treat us equally in the end. But a seed of unease was planted. Over the next couple of years, that seed grew. There were more subtle signs. My parents would help David with a down payment on a car, while I was expected to manage my own vehicle expenses entirely. They paid for David to take expensive workshops related to his art, while suggesting I could find free online resources for my professional development. Every conversation about money seemed to circle back to David's needs. It felt like they were slowly, quietly shifting resources, justifying it by painting David as perpetually in need and me as perpetually capable. The tension built slowly, like a pressure cooker on a low simmer. I started to feel a knot in my stomach whenever the phone rang, and it was my parents. I anticipated the subtle digs, the veiled requests for money, the casual dismissal of my own accomplishments compared to David's smallest perceived victory. I started setting small boundaries, saying no to financial requests when I genuinely couldn't afford them, which was met with thinly veiled disappointment. It was clear my value was directly tied to my willingness to give. Then came the visit. My parents live about a 2-hour drive away. They called a couple of weeks prior to say they were coming to the city for a weekend. They mentioned a doctor's appointment and seeing some old friends. My heart lifted a little. Finally, I thought, a chance to see them, maybe grab dinner, connect. I asked if they wanted to stay with me. I had a spare room. They demurred, saying they'd already booked a hotel closer to the doctor. Okay, I thought, no big deal. I asked when they'd be free to meet up. They were vague, saying their schedule was packed, they'd see. I gave them my address, reminded them I was free Saturday evening. They said they'd call. Saturday came and went. No call. Sunday morning, still nothing. I sent a text. Hey, hope the appointment went well. Are you free today at all? No response. Sunday afternoon, I saw a post on my aunt's social media, pictures of my parents having brunch at a restaurant downtown, just a few blocks from my apartment. They were smiling, laughing, clearly enjoying their visit. My aunt commented, "So, glad you could visit the city." My stomach dropped. They were right there. They had time for brunch, time to see friends, time for a doctor's appointment, but no time for me. The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard, painful ball. Why? Why wouldn't they call? It wasn't just about missing a meal. It was the deliberate exclusion. It felt pointed, like a message. They were in my city, on my doorstep, and they chose to pretend I didn't exist. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This felt like active avoidance. Little did I know, this seemingly small act of omission was connected to something much bigger, something that would reveal the true depth of their betrayal and force me to confront the reality of my place in their family. What I found next would change everything. The silence after their visit was deafening. They drove 2 hours home without a word to me. I waited until Monday morning before calling my mom. My voice was tight, trying to sound casual but failing. Hey Mom, I saw Aunt Carol's pictures. Looked like you had a nice time in the city. There was a pause. Then a sigh, laced with what sounded like feigned weariness. Oh, Maya. Yes, it was fine. So busy, though. Busy? I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. You were right here. I gave you my address. I told you I was free Saturday night. You didn't even text back. We just didn't want to bother you, she said, using the phrase that would echo in my mind for months. We knew you're so busy with your work, your life. We didn't want to interrupt your weekend. It was just a quick trip. Didn't want to bother me, I repeated, the anger starting to bubble up. I'm your daughter. How could seeing me possibly be a bother? Well, you know, she hedged. David wasn't with us, and it just felt like it would be easier this way. We had so much running around to do. David, of course. Even when he wasn't physically present, he was the reason. It felt like a slap in the face. They couldn't even manage a quick coffee because David wasn't there? Or was it something else? The vague mention of a doctor's appointment suddenly felt suspicious. Was that the real reason they were there? And why would that prevent them from seeing me? I pressed for details about the doctor's appointment. My mom was evasive, muttering something about Dad's checkup. Nothing serious. Her voice was flat, lacking the usual warmth she reserved for conversations about David or family gossip. It was clear she was shutting down, putting up a wall. Okay. Mom, I said, my voice now cold, I understand. You were too busy. You didn't want to be bothered by your own daughter. Don't be dramatic, Maya, she snapped back, her tone shifting from weary to annoyed. We'll see you soon. We'll plan a proper visit when David can come. The call ended shortly after that, leaving me feeling hollow and furious. Their excuse was flimsy, insulting. Didn't want to bother you was code for something else entirely. It was a deliberate act of exclusion, and the mention of David felt like a deliberate reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. Over the next few days, I replayed the conversation, their words, the pictures from brunch. The feeling of being dismissed, of being less important, intensified. It wasn't just about the missed visit. It was the culmination of years of subtle slights, of feeling like an ATM and a backup plan, never the priority. I remembered all the times I'd bent over backward for them, the financial help I'd provided, the emotional support I'd offered, only to be met with this. It felt like a profound betrayal of the parent-child bond. I confided in my best friend, Emily. As I recounted the story, the unfairness of it all came flooding out. The chores, the cheap gifts, the constant focus on David, the expectation that I'd always be the responsible one who needed nothing. Emily was outraged. Maya, that's messed up. They were right there and didn't call. That's not wanting to bother you. That's actively avoiding you. What were they really doing here? Her question hung in the air. What were they really doing? Here? The doctor's appointment felt like a cover story. Seeing old friends? Maybe. But why couldn't they squeeze in an hour for me? The pieces didn't fit. There had to be another reason for their secretive trip to my city, a reason they wanted to keep from me. The thought that it might be connected to their future planning, to the inheritance they were subtly diverting towards David, sent a chill down my spine. Were they taking steps I didn't know about? Steps that specifically excluded me? The uncertainty was agonizing. I knew, deep down, that their visit wasn't just a casual trip they were too busy to share with me. It was something they needed to do without my knowledge, and that realization was a punch to the gut. Everything suddenly felt sinister. There was a secret, and I was determined to find out what it was. Emily's question gnawed at me. What were they really doing in my city? The more I thought about it, the less sense their excuses made. My dad's doctor is in our hometown, not 2 hours away. Seeing old friends? Possible, but why the secrecy? Why the blatant avoidance of me? It felt personal, deliberate. I started digging, subtly at first. I called my Aunt Carol, mentioning I was sad I missed seeing Mom and Dad when they were in town. I casually asked if she knew what they were up to. Aunt Carol is a sweet woman. Not malicious, but she can be a bit of a chatterbox. She mentioned they had met with a lawyer while they were in the city. A lawyer. My heart leaped into my throat. Why would they need a lawyer in my city? Their lawyer is back home. Unless they were meeting with a lawyer here because it was related to something here. Something in my city. The only significant connection my parents had to my city, besides me, was a small piece of property they had inherited years ago. A vacant lot on the outskirts of town that had been in my grandmother's family. It wasn't worth much back then, but the area had seen development recently. Could that be it? I did some quick online research. Property records are public. I found the listing for the vacant lot. It showed my parents' names as the owners. But there was a recent update. A new deed transfer had been filed just last week. The property had been transferred to David. The blood drained from my face. They hadn't just been in my city. They had been here to legally transfer a piece of property, an inheritance, to my brother, without telling me. The doctor's appointment and seeing friends were a cover story. They had come to my city, gone to a lawyer, signed over an asset that should have been part of a shared inheritance, and actively avoided me while doing it. The didn't want to bother you wasn't about my busy schedule. It was about keeping their actions a secret. The emotional devastation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the value of the land, which wasn't insignificant anymore. It was the calculated deception, the betrayal, the confirmation that they were actively working to exclude me from their future plans, favoring David in the most concrete way possible. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had deliberately shut me out while taking steps that directly impacted my potential inheritance. It was a level of betrayal I hadn't thought them capable of. I sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. Years of feeling second best, of being the responsible one who needed nothing, culminated in this moment. They had used my perceived independence against me, justifying their actions by telling themselves I'd be fine, while David needed the help. They had taken an asset that represented a small piece of my family history and quietly handed it to my brother, the perpetually needy one. The pain was immense, but beneath it, a cold anger began to solidify. They thought they were being clever, handling things discreetly. They thought I wouldn't find out. They underestimated me. They assumed I would just accept whatever crumbs they decided to leave me, if any. But seeing that deed, seeing the date, knowing they were in my city doing this while ignoring me, that was the turning point. In that moment of emotional devastation, a switch flipped. The hurt didn't disappear, but it was joined by a fierce resolve. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to be the quiet, compliant daughter anymore. They had made their move, a move based on secrecy and exclusion. Now it was my turn. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew I had to fight back, not just for the inheritance, but for my own dignity and worth. The moment had come to take action. After the initial shock and pain subsided, a quiet determination set in. I wasn't going to confront them immediately, not with anger or accusations. That's what they might expect. They'd deny, deflect, make me feel guilty for questioning them. No, I needed a plan, a smart plan, a plan that leveraged their own actions and motivations against them. My first step was to gather more information. I needed to understand the legal implications of the property transfer. I consulted with a lawyer specializing in family law and estates. I explained the situation, the history of favoritism, the recent property transfer, the secrecy surrounding their visit. The lawyer confirmed that while parents are generally free to dispose of their assets as they see fit during their lifetime, the context mattered. The fact that this was potentially part of a larger estate plan, done secretly and seemingly to disinherit one child while favoring another, could be relevant depending on other factors, like whether there was an existing will or any promises made about the inheritance. The lawyer advised me to gather any evidence of their financial dealings, any communications about their intentions for the inheritance, and any documentation related to the property. This felt daunting, like being a detective in my own family drama. But I was motivated. I started going through old emails, text messages, even handwritten notes. I looked for any mention of the vacant lot, any discussions about their will or future plans, any instances where they explicitly compared my financial situation to David's, or stated their intentions to support him. It was painful revisiting some of these memories, seeing the casual way they dismissed my achievements or highlighted David's needs. But it fueled my resolve. I found emails where my mom mentioned the vacant lot, saying it would eventually be split between you kids. I found texts where my dad praised my financial independence, followed by a comment about how David really needed a leg up. These weren't smoking guns on their own, but they painted a clear picture of their mindset and their evolving intentions. I also focused on strengthening my own financial position. If they thought I was self-sufficient and didn't need anything, I would make that my reality, but on my own terms. I worked extra hours, saved aggressively, and started exploring investment options. This wasn't just about money. It was about building my own security, my own foundation, independent of their approval or support. Every dollar saved, every smart financial decision felt like a small act of rebellion, a quiet reclaiming of my own power. During this time, I didn't reveal my discovery to my parents or David. I maintained a polite, if somewhat distant, relationship. It was difficult, pretending everything was normal, knowing what I knew. But I understood that revealing my hand too early would only make them defensive and potentially complicate my legal options. I needed to be strategic, to wait for the right moment. The tension during family calls or rare visits was palpable, at least for me. I saw them through a new lens, not just as my parents, but as individuals who had made a calculated decision to betray my trust and exclude me. I watched their interactions with David, the easy affection, the lack of expectation, and it solidified my understanding of the dynamic. He was the favored son, and I was the reliable daughter who could be taken for granted. My lawyer helped me understand the concept of undue influence and how, in some cases, a pattern of favoritism and manipulation could be relevant in estate disputes, though it was a high bar to clear. The key was demonstrating a clear intent to disinherit or unfairly distribute assets based on something other than legitimate reasons. The secret transfer of the property, coupled with their evasiveness and the history of favoring David, felt significant. I spent weeks preparing, gathering documents, building my case, and mentally preparing myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. This wasn't about revenge in the sense of wanting to hurt them, but about seeking justice, about ensuring I wasn't erased from my family's legacy simply because I was the strong one. I needed them to understand the consequences of their actions, not just legally, but emotionally. I was no longer the little girl doing chores for approval. I was a woman who understood her worth, and I was ready to fight for it. The anticipation was building, the stage was set, and I knew the moment to reveal what I knew was drawing near. The opportunity for confrontation arose naturally, though I orchestrated the timing. My parents called, suggesting a family dinner. Them, David, and me. It was the first time they'd proposed a get-together since their secret trip to my city. I agreed, choosing a neutral location, a restaurant not too far from their house. I dressed carefully, projecting calm confidence, though my hands were trembling slightly. I had all my ducks in a row: the property records, copies of emails, notes from my lawyer. We sat down, and the initial conversation was forced, strained. They made small talk about work, about David's latest project. They carefully avoided mentioning their recent trip. I played along for a while, observing them, feeling the years of unspoken resentments and expectations weighing down the air. Then I took a deep breath and decided it was time. I looked directly at my parents. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I need to talk about your recent visit to my city." Their faces froze. David looked confused. My mom's eyes darted away. My dad cleared his throat, a nervous habit. "Oh, that," my dad said, trying for a casual tone that didn't land. "Just a quick trip. A quick trip where you had time for brunch. With Aunt Carol and a meeting with a lawyer," I stated, letting the words hang in the air. Their pretense crumbled. My mom gasped slightly. My dad's face paled. "How did you know about the lawyer?" my mom stammered. "It's public record," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "Just like the deed transfer for the vacant lot." Silence. A heavy, shocked silence. David was staring at them, then at me, his mouth slightly open. My parents looked like they'd been caught red-handed, which they had. "You transferred the property to David," I continued, keeping my voice even, factual. "While you were in my city, without telling me. You said you didn't want to bother me. Was this what you didn't want to bother me with? The fact that you were cutting me out?" My mom started to cry, a theatrical, self-pitying kind of cry. "Maya, how could you accuse us? We were just planning to give David an asset that belonged to Grandma's side of the family," I challenged. "Planning to quietly shift the inheritance without a word to your other child?" My dad finally spoke, his voice defensive. "We did what we thought was best. David needs it more than you do. You're so capable, so independent. He struggles. So my independence is a punishment?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "My hard work means I deserve less? For years, I've been the one you call when you need help, the one you expect to be responsible, the one who gets the practical, cheap gifts while David gets the lavish ones. And now you're taking a piece of the family inheritance and giving it solely to him, in secret. It's not about cutting you out," my mom sobbed. "It's about making sure David is secure." "And what about my security?" I countered, pulling out the copies of the emails and texts. "You said this property would be split. You've spent years telling me how proud you are of my financial independence, while simultaneously using it as a reason to give David more. This isn't about need. It's about favoritism, plain and simple. And the secrecy, coming to my city, avoiding me while you did this, that's betrayal." David, who had been silent, finally spoke up, sounding bewildered. You gave me the land? Why didn't you tell me?" He looked genuinely surprised, which confirmed my suspicion that they hadn't even been fully transparent with him about the timing and method of the transfer, just that it would eventually be his. "We didn't want to worry you, dear," my mom said to David, instantly shifting her tone to one of tender concern, even in the midst of the confrontation. This blatant switch, even now, was infuriating. "You didn't want to worry David, but you had no problem deceiving me?" I asked, the anger reaching its peak. "You came to my city, the city I live in, the city where I've built my life, and you treated me like a stranger you needed to avoid while you signed away a piece of my potential inheritance. That wasn't just thoughtless, it was cruel." I stood up, my chair scraping back. "I know what you did. I have the proof. I've spoken to a lawyer. This isn't over." My parents looked panicked, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning fear. They had underestimated me. They thought I would just roll over, accept their flimsy excuses, and continue to be the compliant daughter. But I wasn't that person anymore. The confrontation wasn't just about the property. It was about years of being unseen, undervalued, and taken for granted. By revealing that I knew, by showing them I had taken steps to understand my rights, I had shifted the power dynamic. The justice moment was here, not in getting the land back necessarily, but in forcing them to face the consequences of their actions and their deception. Their scrambling, their fear, was the first taste of that justice. Leaving the restaurant, the silence in my car felt heavy, but different from the silence after their visit. This time, it was the silence of power reclaimed. I had spoken my truth, exposed their deception, and shown them I was no longer willing to be their doormat. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. My phone buzzed with frantic calls and texts from my parents. They tried damage control, offering weak apologies, backtracking on their excuses, even suggesting they could make it up to me. But it was too late. The trust was broken, shattered, by years of subtle favoritism and culminating in this blatant act of exclusion and deception. I didn't engage in lengthy arguments. I responded calmly, reiterating that I knew what they did and that I was exploring my options. My lawyer sent them a formal letter not demanding the property back immediately, but outlining the situation, the potential legal implications of their actions within the context of estate planning, and suggesting mediation to discuss a fair distribution of assets, including the recently transferred property, as part of their overall estate. This legal step was key. It wasn't about being greedy. It was about fairness and accountability. It forced them to take the situation seriously. They couldn't just dismiss my feelings or tell me I was being dramatic anymore. There were legal consequences to consider. Their reaction was predictable. They were initially angry, accusing me of being ungrateful and trying to take away David's security. David, caught in the middle, seemed confused and uncomfortable. He wasn't malicious, just used to being the favored one, and the idea that this was causing such conflict seemed to genuinely upset him, though he didn't fully grasp the depth of the betrayal. The real justice, the satisfying part, wasn't just the legal pressure but the shift in their dynamic with me. They could no longer treat me as the reliable daughter who needed nothing and would always be there to bail them out or quietly accept whatever they decided. They had to tread carefully. They saw that my independence, which they had taken for granted, also meant I was capable of standing up for myself and navigating complex situations, including legal ones. The mediation process was difficult but ultimately productive. My lawyer presented the evidence of their long-standing favoritism and the secretive nature of the property transfer. Faced with the potential legal challenges and the undeniable truth of their actions, my parents were forced to compromise. We reached an agreement. The vacant lot would remain in David's name, but its value would be factored into the overall estate plan, ensuring that when the time came, the remaining assets would be distributed in a way that was equitable, taking into account the value David had already received. Furthermore, they agreed to be transparent with both David and me about their will and estate plans moving forward. This wasn't a cinematic victory where they lost everything. It was a realistic outcome. I didn't get the land back, but I secured a promise of fairness for the future. And, more importantly, I forced them to acknowledge their actions and the harm they had caused. The consequences for them were not financial ruin, but the loss of their ability to control the narrative, to operate in secrecy, and to take my compliance for granted. They had to face the fact that their favoritism had damaged our relationship and had legal ramifications. The most satisfying part was seeing their reaction when they realized I wasn't going to back down. The shock, the fear, the grudging respect that replaced their dismissiveness. They had tried to quietly erase me from a part of their legacy, and I had responded by forcing them to confront the full picture of their actions. Loose ends were tied up in the sense that the legal matter was resolved, and future plans were made transparent. The immediate aftermath was a strained peace, a new, more honest, but less emotionally close relationship. Life after the confrontation and mediation was different. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach eased. I no longer felt obligated to perform the role of the responsible daughter who needed nothing. I set clear boundaries regarding finances and emotional support. I helped when I genuinely wanted to, not out of obligation or a desperate hope for approval. My relationship with my parents is cordial, but it lacks the easy intimacy it once had. The trust is still fragile. We talk, we see each other occasionally, but the dynamic has fundamentally changed. They are more careful with their words and actions around me, no longer making casual, dismissive comments about my needs or openly favoring David in front of me. David and I have also had some difficult conversations. He's beginning to understand the years of unequal treatment, and while it's uncomfortable for him, it's a necessary step towards a more honest relationship between us. The biggest shift has been within myself. For years, my sense of self-worth was tied to my parents' approval, to being the good, responsible daughter. When they showed me how little they valued that, it was devastating. But standing up for myself, doing the hard work of gathering evidence, seeking legal counsel, and confronting them, that process was incredibly empowering. I learned that my worth isn't determined by my family's validation or their willingness to treat me fairly. My worth comes from within, from my strength, my intelligence, my resilience. The lessons learned are profound. Toxic family patterns are deeply ingrained, and breaking them requires courage and a willingness to face difficult truths. You can't force people to change, but you can change how you interact with them and refuse to participate in dynamics that harm you. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. And sometimes, the most powerful form of justice isn't dramatic revenge, but simply demanding to be treated with respect and holding people accountable for their actions. I'm building a new beginning for myself, one where my happiness and security are my own responsibility, not dependent on the whims or favoritism of others. I'm focusing on my career, my friendships, and building a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. The pain of the betrayal still lingers sometimes, a reminder of what happened, but it's no longer the dominant feeling. It's been replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense of liberation. I found my voice. I stood my ground, and in doing so, I found my own value. It's a complex ending. Gratitude for the lessons learned mixed with the lingering sadness of a damaged family relationship. But it's real, and it's mine. Thank you for reading my story. This journey of family injustice and finding my own empowerment was incredibly difficult, but ultimately, it led me to a stronger sense of self. Which part of my story surprised you the most? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories of overcoming challenges and finding your voice, please subscribe to my channel.